LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out over 40 of the weekend's best clips, mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. And that's the corporate media here in the United States. Plus, I'll be adding in the usual quasi-news political comedy clips from last night's Saturday Night Live and HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday night. I'll be covering the topics you can see listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should see time indexes down there that you can use to skip to the topics that interest you the most. I'll have the most clips on the immigration issue this week because President Obama made his big announcement on Thursday that he was taking executive action deferring deportation of about 4 million undocumented immigrants. I'll also have quite a few clips on the expected grand jury decision in Ferguson, Missouri, charging or not charging Officer Darren Wilson for killing that unarmed black teenager Michael Brown and what it says about our racist criminal justice system. I'll also have a few clips on the deadline for the U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations that is coming up tomorrow. I'll even have a few clips on the Bill Cosby controversy and one at the end from one of my favorite comedians, John Cleese, discussing religious fundamentalism with Bill Maher. But first, I wanted to start with a clip I missed on last week's broadcast because this comes from last week's Zakaria GPS on CNN, where after an interview about Jon Stewart's new movie Rosewood, Zakaria asked Jon Stewart at the end if he got his Arab Spring coverage from CNN, and you can see Jon Stewart using this amusing metaphor to talk about the good CNN and the bad CNN over in this clip.
Proportion.
I want to get one last admission from you.
Please.
When world historical things like the Green Movement are happening, the Arab Spring are happening.
Yes, yes.
You tune
where do
on,
I get my news?
You
want to
tune
know where
on
I
to
get my
CNN
news?
and watch these brave correspondents who are risking their lives.
I set a Google alert for Blitzer, and then I just wait.
Say honestly.
We have a CNN exclusive tonight. The Empire State Building is blue.
During the Green Revolution, you watched CNN and appreciated the brave reporting the reporters
Let me
did.
tell you something. The reason why I make fun of certain aspects of CNN is to be inspired by the brave reporting, is to want more.
Good.
And,
that's all.
so that's all it is.
You want more CNN.
I want more of good CNN. CNN is very similar to the doll Chucky. Sometimes it's good Chucky, but you really got to watch out for bad Chucky.
But we're all inspired by the good stuff.
No question.
Next on.
So I thought as I start my show where I do my criticism of the media, I should show that much more amusing criticism from Jon Stewart of the quality of CNN broadcasting, the good and the bad. I like the Chucky metaphor. I haven't seen all the Chucky movies, but I think I've seen enough to get that one. And now I want to move to the biggest topic of the week. I'll have about half the clips of the show, I think, on President Obama's big announcement on immigration. And, you know, I've been working on this for quite a long time here in California with my volunteer work with the ACLU. I've been part of a coalition working for immigrants' rights. And one of the things that's kind of disappointing about this, even though there are 4 million people covered, there are a lot of people not covered. And there are a lot of things that even the people who are covered don't get. And I thought that Bill Maher actually pointed this out pretty well in his monologue on Friday night, talking about how President Obama did a lot of things in his executive action to try to placate the concerns of Republicans, as you can see over in this clip.
Which is crazy because he purposely reached out to the Republicans in his executive order. It says specifically, these Latinos who, by the way, pay taxes, do jobs nobody else wants to do. Okay, they're not going to get health care benefits, no Obamacare for them, not going to get welfare benefits, no voting rights, no unemployment benefits. So he's saying to conservatives, hey, guys, we're still being assholes. Just not as big an asshole as we used to.
And that's true. There are a lot of important things missing from what President Obama did, but that, of course, didn't stop the right wing and Fox News from reporting it as, the hugest catastrophe ever, which I also want to show one more clip from Bill Maher's monologue. And by the way, I put a link down in the video description to the entire monologue from HBO's Real Time last Friday night. It's available on YouTube for free, so you can just click on that and watch the whole monologue. But here's one more insight from Bill Maher on how the not that strong executive action, I guess, from the point of view of some, got reported over on Fox News this week over here.
No, he signed the big executive order protecting 4 million illegal immigrants from deportation. Or as Fox News reported it, President Black Panther unites minorities against whites.
And of course, that's not exactly the way Fox News reported it, but I did want to show the introduction to Fox News Sunday, where they talked about President Obama setting off a furor. So that was like their first point on this. And then they showed like a two-sided argument they were going to have between Ted Cruz and Xavier Becerra, and I'll show both sides of that. But then at the end, they're going to discuss, is this really legal? And they're going to do it with the Republican governor of Texas, or governor-elect of Texas, Greg Abbott. And you'll see that ended up being a one-sided conversation. There was no other side representative, and they don't even mention he's a Republican. They just talk about how he's a governor, as you can see in the introduction to Fox News Sunday this morning here.
Wallace. President Obama sets off a furor, sidestepping Congress to shield millions of illegals from deportation.
The actions I'm taking are not only lawful, they're the kinds of actions taken by every single Republican president and every single Democratic president for the past half-century.
The president has taken actions that he himself has said are those of a king or an emperor, not an American president.
How will the new GOP majority respond? We'll ask Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who's leading the charge against the president's actions. Will the executive order fix a broken immigration system? We'll talk with one of the plan's top advocates, House Democratic Caucus Chair Xavier Becerra. Then, did President Obama break the law?
The president has no legal authority to grant legal status to people who are here in the United States illegally.
We'll ask Texas Attorney General and Governor-elect Greg Abbott, who says he'll sue the president on behalf of his state.
So yeah, you can see there that other segment with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who was not identified even as a Republican, was just about whether it was going to be whether what President Obama did was illegal, and surprise, surprise, he decided the Republican governor of Texas says it was illegal, and that was after that two-sided debate where they gave Obama his say and then John Boehner his say in the introduction. But I don't know, I thought that was kind of a biased way of framing the issues, but one of the best framing of the issues I saw this morning on the whole immigration controversy was over on NBC's Meet the Press, where they had their reporter John Yang talk about the way this impacts real families. He went to this small town in Arizona and talked to some of the families of undocumented immigrants and actual undocumented immigrants themselves. And I thought it was a really good report. I thought it was kind of strange the way Chuck Todd introduced it as talking to people on the ground. Like, Chuck Todd doesn't spend any time on the ground. I don't know. And then he also emphasized at the end that they tried to get Republicans to talk to them in Arizona, and no Arizona Republicans would talk to them. And you can see that report about the report on NBC's Meet the Press about the effect of Obama's executive action on real people over here.
My colleague John Yang to go down to Arizona to get a first-hand look at how people on the ground are reacting to the president's plan.
El Mirage, Arizona, outside Phoenix, is the kind of place where President Obama's immigration policies become real, potentially changing lives.
I'm going to be able to go to college now.
Myra Gomez, brought here against the law from El Salvador by her parents 10 years ago, is now eligible for protection. What do you want to study?
I want to become a nurse and then become a detective.
16-year-old Maria Flores watched the president on her laptop at soccer practice.
How did you feel?
I felt happy because, my mom's not going to be, she's going to come out of the shadows.
Maria's a citizen because she was born in Arizona, but her single mother is an undocumented Mexican immigrant. Now her mom may work legally and not worry about being deported.
Tell me what that's like to live in the shadows.
It's really, big thing because, a lot of people are, scared of, sheriffs, getting deported or, not seeing their families ever again.
This is Maricopa County, where Sheriff Joe Arpaio is known for his tough stand on illegal immigration. He's already suing to block the new policy, calling it a free pass for undocumented immigrants.
What about all the millions of people that come into our country? They wait for years to get here, and they do it the right way, and now how do you think they feel when you're giving a get-out-of-jail card free to these 5 million people?
We asked a number of Republican groups for comment, and they declined.
El Mirage was founded by migrant farm workers from Mexico who wanted to put down roots of their own. Today, their descendants and newer arrivals, both documented and undocumented, still play a crucial role in the area's economy.
No one knows how many undocumented immigrants already work illegally on farms, in restaurants, or in construction.
What would it mean to this community if everyone who was undocumented was deported?
This community will become like a ghost town. Yeah, it'll be empty.
Fourth-generation West Valley farmer Kevin Rogers says the new policy helps agriculture get the workers it needs.
Today's folks don't want to work in the fields. They don't want to drive my hay baler at 3 o'clock in the morning. They don't want to harvest lettuce. This is a career they choose not to do. Even at $10, $15 an hour, they choose not to do that.
For Maria Flores, it means hope for the future.
Go to college, have a better life, not go through what mom has been through.
The kind of future anyone would wish for the next generation. For Meet the Press, John Yang, El Mirage, Arizona.
Again, a lot of Republican groups in Arizona did not want to respond on camera when we sent John Yang down there. I'm joined now.
So, yeah, other than the kind of strange introduction and conclusion from Chuck Todd, I thought that report from John Yang was really insightful about the way this executive action on immigration is going to affect real people. And that's based on my experience, working with real people on the ground, I guess, to use Chuck Todd's phrase, here in Sacramento. There's a big coalition of people working for immigrants' rights. We actually had a rally on Friday. I originally learned all this statement and how to answer all these possible questions for this press conference in case I had to speak, but I didn't end up speaking. I just stood in solidarity in the background. You can see I'm kind of in the middle of that picture. You can probably pick me out. One of the pictures from our rally in front of the federal building here in Sacramento. And, I think looking at the real people who are being affected, the people right in the front of that photo are holding up the American Dream banner. Those are all people whose families are directly affected one way or another. These 4 million people, there are millions of Californians who are undocumented, and tens of thousands of them will be able to come out of the shadows now, which I think is a really good thing. But not everyone thought it was a good thing, including, you might expect, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas was over on Fox News Sunday this morning, and I want to show a few clips of his kind of unreasonable reaction to this whole thing. Starting, here's the first clip from that interview. Chris Wallace actually confronts Ted Cruz with the idea that President Obama is just prioritizing felons over families, and that's one of the more confrontational questions that Chris Wallace asked Ted Cruz, and you can see how Ted Cruz answered that over in this clip.
I want to separate policy from process, what the president did from how he did it. The president says that he's using his prosecutorial discretion to go after the bad guys and not to go after parents of people who are in this country legally. Here's how he explained it.
Felons, not families. Criminals, not children. Gang members, not a mom who's working hard to provide for her kids. We'll prioritize, just like law enforcement does every day.
Senator, what's wrong with that policy?
Well, the notion that this is just prosecutorial discretion is simply nonsense. The Constitution gives Congress the authority to establish our immigration laws. And what the President announced this week is a wholesale refusal to follow our immigration laws, to enforce our immigration laws. Number one, for 4 to 5 million people here illegally, he's promising to print up and give work authorizations. Essentially, he's gotten in the job of counterfeiting immigration papers because there's no legal authority to do what he's doing. He's simply giving work authorizations and claiming unilateral authority. But secondly, the memo that he put out, not the speech, but the memo that he put out to the Department of Homeland Security says that they are not to enforce immigration laws other than for violent criminals and a few discrete categories. But for most of the 12 million people here illegally, the President is instructing the executive branch no longer enforce the immigration laws. It is a stunning and sad display of a President declining to honor his constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Well, I want to... And, that whole argument is legally ridiculous. As a lawyer, I can tell you that in immigration law, the President is given a huge amounts of discretion to give work permits to immigrants, and also this whole idea that he's telling his people not to enforce against the vast majority of the 11 million. I just told you earlier, it's only about 4 million. There are 6 or 7 million of undocumented immigrants in the country who are not affected by this executive action, and that's one of the downsides. But I want to show one more clip of Ted Cruz, well, there are actually a couple more clips of Ted Cruz, but another one of him like going way overboard on the supposed executive overreach and making a whole bunch of factual misstatements. But you notice at the beginning of that clip I showed before, the host, Chris Wallace, told Senator Ted Cruz that he was going to ask him about the process first and then ask him about, the actual policy of helping all these people. I showed you that clip of the people who are actually helped by this, and that's what I think is most important. You'll see in the second question, Chris Wallace starts and says, well, we just talked about policy, and of course you just saw Ted Cruz didn't talk about policy. Now let's get to process and ask him a second process question, because this is the question that Chris Wallace asks immediately after the clip I showed there. And Ted Cruz again goes off on this, rant that has very little basis in fact, as I'll discuss after you see that clip here.
I'll pick up on that because we talked about the policy, but I also want to talk about the process and the fact that the President is doing this by executive action. He says that there is a long precedent for chief executives to do exactly that. Take a look.
The actions I'm taking are not only lawful, they're the kinds of actions taken by every single Republican president and every single Democratic president for the past half century.
Senator, Presidents Reagan and Bush 41 took executive action to grant legal status to about 1.5 million people who were in this country illegally. What's the difference?
As a matter of constitutional law, the claim the President just made there is frivolous, which I would note he acknowledged 22 times over the last 5 years. He said over and over again that he had no constitutional authority to do this until suddenly he decided it'd be politically beneficial to do so. The difference with Reagan and Bush is both of them were working with Congress and implementing congressional statutes. Absolutely, Congress can change the immigration laws, and the President, in the course of executing the immigration laws, can put congressional will into effect. The difference here is this is not a president who wants to work with Congress. Rather, this is a president who is openly defying Congress. And Chris, I actually can't put it any better than Saturday Night Live put it last night, where they reprised the old Schoolhouse Rock. You remember how a bill becomes a law? And Saturday Night Live literally had the president pushing the bill down the steps of the Capitol because we no longer need the steps in the Constitution for how we pass laws because the president now is claiming unilateral authority the Constitution doesn't give him. And I'll tell you the danger of that, Chris. It's not just on the substance here, and the substance here is very damaging to working men and women across this country. but it's a far broader danger for anyone concerned about liberty. Because if this president can impose his own immigration laws unilaterally, then the next president can impose his own laws, whether it's immigration, whether it's tax, whether it's labor, whether it's environmental. We stop having a constitutional system of checks and balances that's protected our liberty, and we move just to unilateral executive authority. Essentially, using the president's own word, it's the power of a monarch or an emperor.
Senator.
So yeah, by the end there, he got to President Obama being an emperor, which of course is a word that Obama used himself in terms of not overreaching his executive authority. So I guess you can't completely blame him for that. But I also want to show you a clip from that Saturday Night Live sketch that Senator Ted Cruz mentioned, which I thought was pretty funny, and it was definitely showed that Saturday Night Live can also go after Democrats and the president, which they've done on many occasions. This is Jay Pharaoh plays President Obama as usual, and then there's Kyle Mooney plays like the kid in the I'm Just a Bill cartoon come to life, and Kenan Thompson is the Bill, and then you'll see the other character in here is Bobby Monaghan. I'm not going to show the whole thing. This is just a clip. You know, there's a lot of singing. Kenan Thompson sings the whole song about how a bill becomes a law, and then you can see what happens at the end of that song over here.
If I pass the legislative test, then I wind up on the president's desk, and I say, oh, my sweet, Woodrow Wilson, my legs, they were made of paper.
President Obama, what's the big idea? That bill was trying to become a law.
I realize that. But you know, son, there's actually an even easier way to get things done around here. It's called an executive order.
I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happened. And that's it. Wait a second, don't you have to go through Congress at some point? Oh, that's adorable. You still think that's how government works?
So I have to admit that was funny, even though I don't think that it's really accurate in terms of the spin it puts on the whole situation. And, well, even Saturday Night Live itself, you know, I showed that clip last week of last week's Cold Open where they were talking about President Barack Obama and the new Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell getting together and drinking Kentucky bourbon and getting more and more honest as they got more and more drunk. And I'm going to show that clip again because it also showed a more honest representation of who it is who stopped the immigration bill from passing. It wasn't President Obama pushing it down the steps. You can see that over here.
You know, I think that this election had a clear message.
Yes, it did. Folks want us to work together.
The people rejected you.
Okay, good start.
We ask you not to move on immigration without us, and the first thing you do is say you're going to move the first thing.
Okay, so you're telling me that Republicans are going to pass an immigration bill? That's your first. That's one of your first acts. A bill of immigration.
Absolutely, yes. It is a huge priority.
Really?
Definitely.
Okay. Now we're having fun.
So yeah, that's sort of the opposite spin from Saturday Night Live last week, where they pointed out that it was really the Republicans that killed the immigration bill because, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, could have taken up the Senate bill at any time and passed bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. So it's not really President Obama who pushed the bill down the steps, although, like I said, I thought that was a funny skit for the cold open. And by the way, you can see the entire Saturday Night Live episode at a link that I put down in the video description. I want to show one more clip of that Senator Ted Cruz interview on Fox News Sunday. In this one, he's talking about what the Republicans are going to do in response to President Obama's huge executive overreach, as Republicans call it. And there seems to be that Republicans, if they follow what Ted Cruz wants to do, it would be a huge overreaction. And you can see that Ted Cruz's recommendation on Fox News Sunday this morning, talking to Chris Wallace here.
And there's quite a split within your party. As I understand it, what you're saying is that the Republicans should vote to fund the government in all of the departments except one, and that is that you would attach a rider, an amendment, to funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which handles immigration, taking back or rescinding his executive action. And that the thought is that if he vetoes that, then he's responsible for shutting down the department. The problem is that's almost exactly what you did with the government shutdown across the entire government in October of 2013 in Obamacare, and it backfired badly on your party.
Well, Chris, look, I'm going to suggest a very simple proposition. All across this country, Republicans campaigned saying, if you elect a Republican Senate, we will stop President Obama's illegal amnesty. My very simple suggestion to my colleagues and friends in the Republican Party is we need to honor what we said. We need to actually do what we said 2 weeks ago on the campaign trail.
So would
now,
you?
I've laid out a
is that what you would do,
plan.
Sir? Because we have limited time. Is that what you're saying you would do? That you would attach a rider to funding for just the one Department of Homeland Security?
Chris, I've laid out a detailed, systematic plan for what Congress should do. We should use the constitutional checks and balances we have to rein in the abuse of power of the executive. Step number one that I've called for is the incoming majority leader should announce that if the president implements this lawless amnesty, that the Senate will not confirm any executive or judicial nominees other than vital national security positions for the next 2 years unless and until the president ends this lawless amnesty.
Sir, let me pick
that
you up.
is an explicit authority given to the Senate.
If I may, let me pick up right on that, because are you saying that the Senate should refuse to confirm Loretta Lynch, the president's new nominee for Attorney General, and thereby leave Eric Holder, who you don't like very much, in that position even longer?
Chris, what I'm saying is we should use the constitutional checks and balances we have to rein in the executive. You know, if you read the Federalist Papers, our framers talked about a president that would behave like a monarch, that would rule by diktat and decree rather than following
Sir, I understand that. I'm asking a direct question, though. Would you block Loretta Lynch's confirmation as Attorney General and leave Eric Holder in the job?
In my view, the majority leader should decline to bring to the floor of the Senate any nomination other than vital national security positions. Now that is a serious and major step. It is a power the majority leader has, and nobody else has any ability to alter. If the majority leader announced that, it would impose real consequences on the president and the administration.
All right.
So I guess you can't fault Chris Wallace there for not trying to get an answer out of Senator Ted Cruz about whether he would oppose the nomination of the new Attorney General Loretta Lynch in retaliation for this executive order. And you saw Senator Ted Cruz kept dodging that. He never said whether the Attorney General was, you know, an important national security post. I mean, arguably it is a really important national security post. So Senator Ted Cruz never answered that question. And his other idea about putting a rider on the Homeland Security budget bill so that it stops any money for Obama's executive order, not only is that like the strategy that caused the shutdown that backfired on the Republicans, when was it, about a year ago, on Obamacare, but the other problem with that is it's really difficult to defund President Obama's executive action. You know, the part about not deporting people, how do you like defund not deporting people? That's like impossible. And then a lot of the immigration system is actually self-funded by fees, so the Congress can't really do it by that kind of, budget rider, can't defund it. So I don't think that's really going to work very well. Now, I just showed Chris Wallace, being a little dogged going after Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican, to give him a little credit, but you can see he really shows his bias in this question he asks Democratic Representative Xavier Becerra, where he says he actually agrees with Senator Ted Cruz's legal conclusion that what President Obama wants to do is different from what Reagan and Bush 41 did. And among other things, Chris Wallace is wrong about that. And you can see Xavier Becerra kind of do a good job answering this kind of biased question, or question where Chris Wallace reveals his own bias over in this clip.
I mean, it's no different what any president has done. And as you said, what Presidents Reagan and Bush Sr. did was very similar to what the president is doing.
Here's
Absolutely.
the difference. No, here's the difference, and this is what Senator Cruz said, and I have to say I think he's right about this. Reagan and Bush 41 acted after a major immigration reform bill was passed, Simpson-Mazzoli, in 1986. Please, sir. A major bill was passed in 1986, and he was cleaning up after what they did. This president is going around Congress and ignoring them. There is a difference there, sir.
There's a difference in time. Show me where in the Constitution it says you can have executive action if you do it within 3 days or 3 years of a law, but you can't do it if it's 3 years and 1 day. Come on, Chris. The Constitution
how long
is
has it been
very
since
clear.
there was comprehensive immigration reform? What's he cleaning up after?
See what
A
happens?
light just went out.
That's what happens. You have a situation where Congress has been unwilling to act. The Senate passed a bipartisan bill. The House has been sitting on it for 514 days.
Okay.
And so the president is saying, if you won't act, I'll do what I can under the law.
You don't have to argue.
And Representative Xavier Becerra is right. The president has broad discretion to implement the laws, and not just to implement the laws in general, but the immigration laws passed by Congress give the president a lot of discretion on issuing work permits and on deciding who's deportable and who gets parole in place and who gets deferred action. And these are all like concepts that come from immigration law, and the Supreme Court has actually reaffirmed the president's broad discretion just as recently as 2012 in that Arizona versus United States case about the Arizona law SB 1070 that mostly got struck down, and part of that was because of the executive branch's broad authority in the area of immigration. So Xavier Becerra is right, and I want to show one more clip of Chris Wallace confronting Xavier Becerra, I think a little more vigorously than he did Ted Cruz, and this is on President Obama's previous quotes. He says, Chris Wallace says to Xavier Becerra, don't argue with me, argue with President Obama, who said he didn't have the authority to do this. And and you can see the quote that Chris Wallace comes up with isn't all that dispositive, although I think President Obama was somewhat dishonest, as I'll talk about a little more after I show you that clip here.
You don't have to argue with me. You can argue with the president, because here's the point. More than 20 times, Cruz says 22 times, the president said he didn't have the authority to do exactly.
That's not true. That's not true.
Would you let me?
But
it works better if I get to ask the question.
Quote me, Chris, what the president said, not what you're interpreting.
You know what? I will.
Okay.
The president said that he didn't have the authority to do exactly what he did do this week.
No.
Take a look.
Let's take a look.
I'm the President of the United States. I'm not the Emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed.
Right. He cannot change a law. He can only execute them. And the Supreme Court, as recently as 2 years ago, said the president has broad discretion to execute the laws.
He was specifically asked in that was a Google Hangout in 2013. Right. He was specifically asked, can't you do something to not split up these families when you got a child? He was specifically asked about exactly this case. When you got a child who's here legally, don't deport the parent. And he said, I'm not a monarch, I'm not a king, I can only do what Congress allows me to do. And he was saying he couldn't do this. He said it 22 times.
He said he couldn't change the law, and he was hoping Congress would act. That he went ahead and took action. By the way, you mischaracterized what he did. He didn't grant legal status to a single soul. He simply is deferring the deportation. All of these folks are still deportable. What he's doing is he's putting...
why didn't he do it back in 2013?
Because he was hoping Congress would pass the Senate bipartisan immigration bill, which would do it through the congressional means.
So those 22 times when he said, I can't do this...
He said he can't change the law, which is absolutely true, but he has the discretion to try to make a law work better and smarter. Chris, the solution is very simple here. It's not to impeach the president. That's abusive. It's not to
Very few people are talking about impeaching the president except for Democrats, sir.
It's not to have one branch of government sue another branch of government, and it's certainly not, as Senator Cruz is implying, to shut down the government again. It's to pass a law. Passing a law, congressional action trumps any executive action. But here we are, 17 months since the Senate passed the bipartisan
Well, in this
bill,
case,
and House
let me
Republicans
just say, in this
won't
case,
do a thing.
executive action is trumping congressional inaction.
This
Congressman
is a game
Becerra,
changer.
thank you.
We're going to get this done, and this is a game changer that will help us get this done.
Thanks for coming.
So, yeah, I thought, again, Representative Xavier Becerra did a good job of holding the Democratic position up to the confrontational questioning of Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace there. And, you know, I haven't personally checked all the supposed 22 times that President Obama said that he didn't have the power to do this, but he actually does have the power. You know, I made a video a couple years ago, and I put a link down in the video description. Maybe I'll put it up as a annotation you can click on when this is a recorded show. Also, Fox News creates false Obama contradiction on immigration, where back a couple years ago, Fox News was using this quote where President Obama said he can't do everything, but there are some things he can do. And a lot of the quotes are kind of like that, but not all of them. I mean, in that February 14th, 2013 Google Hangout, which I remember because my YouTube acquaintance Lee Doran, who has the How the World Works channel, was actually part of that Google Hangout and asked the president a question about drones. And later I'll show another clip from that same interview. Actually, I'm about to show the one. You'll see there is a clip of that Google Hangout, and if you look down in the bottom left corner, you'll see a little picture of Lee Doran down there, although he doesn't speak in this clip. But what's interesting about the clip I'm going to show you, this is the Univision host Jose Diaz-Balart was on NBC's Meet the Press, and he actually pointed out that the question he asked that people say, you know, and it's the one that has the whole emperor quote in it, that in that case he was actually asking a specific question about whether Obama had the power to give deferred action to the parents of the Dreamers, which is the kids who were brought here not of their own accord, you know, when they were younger than 16, and they did all these other things, and those are the so-called Dreamers, and that was the last relief that President Obama gave out, deferred action for childhood arrivals, what's called DACA. So Jose Diaz-Balart, his question was whether he could give relief to the parents of those kids, and Obama said no, and his executive action doesn't give relief to those parents. But I'll talk about all of that a little more after you see the question that Chuck Todd asked Jose Diaz-Balart. And like I said, if you watch the Google Hangout clip here, you'll see a little picture of Lee Doran in the bottom left corner in this clip.
Let me know, because I want to set up Jose over here. Let me play those remarks of the president himself questioning his legal authority.
There are enough laws on the books by Congress that are very clear in terms of how we have to enforce our immigration system, that for me to simply, through executive order, ignore those congressional mandates would not conform with my appropriate role as president. If we start broadening that, then essentially I would be ignoring the law in a way that I think would be very difficult to defend legally. I'm not the Emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed.
Jose, you've done a ton of reporting on this. You're finding quite a few legal scholars that are questioning.
Yeah, I mean, look,
his legality.
Yeah, and to put that interview that I had with him in context, that was the 30th of January of 2013, the first time he went back to Del Sol High School in Las Vegas.
And he was cajoling, he was hoping to motivate.
He was optimistic. But I got to tell you something. He felt that he did not have the authority to, for example, and that was a very specific question I asked him, why not include DACA parents? Yeah. You know, parents of DACA kids, and he said, I don't have the authority.
Which he didn't include them in.
Which he did not do.
That's right.
And it's important to state. Now, on the issue of deportations, this is not a wishy-washy president on immigration. The last 6 years, there have been more than 2 million deportations in this country. That's the entire population of Houston. that has been deported. And every single time someone is deported, the question that many ask is, well, what about those kids that are born in the United States of America? Should they have their families destroyed because their parents are undocumented? He's dealing with this issue because the House of Representatives didn't do squat.
Yeah. So again, that's a really good argument at the end there from Jose Diaz-Belart, and especially, I mean, that is what most of this executive action, that's who it applies to. It's to the parents of U.S. citizens who are undocumented and the parents of legal residents, you know, the undocumented parents of U.S. citizens and the undocumented parents of legal residents. And it's what Jose Diaz-Belart said there about, you know, why should our policy rip away the parents of these children? It just makes no sense. So I also want to show next, President Obama himself was over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had an exclusive interview. George Stephanopoulos asked him questions about immigration and some other stuff that I'll show later, but I'm going to show a couple clips on immigration. First, here's President Obama responding to the 22 or however many past quotes, and you'll see George Stephanopoulos plays one or two of them. I can't remember how many. And here's President Obama's response, which I don't think is entirely honest, again, as I'll discuss after you see it here.
More than you used to think you can do. You know, several times over the last couple of years you were asked, can you do more? And he said, no, I'm out of administrative flexibility. What changed?
Well, that's not true. If you look, George, I oftentimes was asked, can you just halt deportations? And I said, no, I can't do that.
No, but I have right here on a Google Hangout, you were asked specifically, what can you do to prevent families from being broken apart? And you said, I'm not an emperor.
I'm not the emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed. We've kind of stretched our administrative flexibility as much as we can.
George, what is absolutely true is that we couldn't solve the entire problem and still can't solve the entire problem. But what we can do is to prioritize felons, criminals, recent arrivals, folks who are coming right at the border, and acknowledge that if somebody's been here for over 5 years, they may have an American child or a legal permanent resident child. It doesn't make sense for us to prioritize them when we know that we need more resources.
But do you have the right to make that decision on your own?
Absolutely. If you look, every president, Democrat and Republican, over decades, has done the same thing. George H.W. Bush, about 40% of the undocumented persons at the time were provided a similar kind of relief as a consequence of executive action.
Both Reagan, but in that case, there were bipartisan bills passed. They were acting after the bills were passed, not because Congress did not act.
Well, George, I'm not sure that argues in favor. If Congress acted specifically and left something out, and then the president goes ahead right afterwards and does more than Congress agreed to, it's actually not different. It's similar. The fact is that we exercise prosecutorial discretion all the time. You know, the primary...
So the second half of what President Obama said there was completely accurate about his authority. He definitely has the authority, and it is similar to what Reagan and Bush 41 did. He has a lot of discretion under the legislation passed by Congress, as I previously said. But the first half of what he said about how he's being quoted out of context all the time, you know, I showed my video where I showed Fox News had quoted him out of context to create this false contradiction on immigration a couple years ago. And I pointed out that Jose Diaz-Belart quote, where he said he couldn't give relief to the parents of the DACA kids or the Dreamers, and he actually didn't do it in his executive order. But that clip that George Stephanopoulos showed from the Google Hangout that included Lee Doran, February 14th, 2013, I think it was Valentine's Day, that's why I remember it. In that clip, and I put a link down to the entire Google Hangout on the White House YouTube channel, he's asked by this Latina activist, like George Stephanopoulos said there, you know, what can you do to stop tearing apart families? And by the end of his answer, he does say that, you know, like they showed in the clip on from George Stephanopoulos there, that we've stretched our administrative flexibility to the limit, or whatever it was exactly, and that's just not true. And that's the point. You know, the Republicans are saying he said 22 times that he couldn't do this, and he went ahead and did it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have the authority to do it. It means he was being dishonest before when he said he couldn't do it, and he was trying basically to give excuses to the Latino activists and other, the pro-immigration rights activists like the people I work with, who have been putting pressure on him for years and years and years to try to do something, either get comprehensive immigration reform through the Congress, and if not that, then to take what executive action he can. And he didn't do as much as he could, but he did, like I said, there are about 4 million people who are going to get relief under this, and so I guess that's something. And so I think President Obama was dishonest over the past couple years when he was giving excuses why he kept waiting and waiting to act, and I think he waited too long, as I've said on previous episodes of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. When he said he was going to do it by the end of the summer, I thought he should have gone ahead and done it and not waited till after the election, at least, and certainly didn't win him any seats in the Senate, or win Democrats any seats in the Senate, and it might have helped them in some places, but if he had followed through on his promise, and might have helped with some of these activists who I work with, who were really disappointed that he waited so long to do what he finally did. And one place I do also agree with President Obama on the immigration issue is on the way that Republicans are overreacting, and I want to show another answer in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, where George asked him about this Republican overreaction, and here's what he said in this clip.
The president seemed unfazed by dramatic warnings from top Republicans.
Mitch McConnell should stand up and say the new Congress for the next 2 years will not confirm a single nomination.
You could see instances of anarchy. You could see violence.
There's often a lot of rhetoric coming out of Congress and in Washington, but it doesn't match up to what I think the American people expect. What the American people expect is that if we disagree on one thing, then we disagree on that thing, and then we work on everything else. And one of the habits that we've seen in Congress over the last 4 years since the House Republicans took over is that everything becomes hostage to one disagreement. So a couple of years ago was Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And they decided, we're going to shut down the government because we disagree with this one law.
They say they're not going to do that this time.
Well, if they're not going to do that, then we shouldn't have a problem.
So, yeah, that was President Obama's reaction to some of the Republican overreaction. I want to show some of that Republican overreaction and then some of the Democratic defenses from several of the shows this morning. First, I want to show Republican Lindsey Graham from CNN's State of the Union. He was talking to the substitute host, Gloria Borger, and he did say that what President Obama did was illegal and unconstitutional, which I don't think is true, but he didn't go so far as being in favor of impeachment when he got kind of baited by Gloria Borger, as I'll talk about a little more after you see that over here.
Ma'am, it's one thing to say as an executive agency, I don't have the money to prosecute everybody or to deport everybody, so I'm going to rank them in order. It's another for the President of the United States to say, not only will I decide not to prosecute a group of people, but I will affirmatively give you legal status.
So
that is well beyond executive action.
So if it's unconstitutional, as you think, is it an impeachable offense?
Right. I'm not going to go down the road of impeaching the president, and let me tell you why. Immigration has been dogging the country since 2006. The president is frustrated. I have a solution that I've been supporting that is comprehensive, that would allow legal status to the people in question, but you do it through a congressional action where you get the entire system fixed. His action does not secure the border. It doesn't fix a broken legal immigration system, and it leaves millions of people left out in terms of the 11 million.
Okay.
So I'm not going to go down the impeachment road.
Okay, you're not.
So at least Lindsey Graham doesn't want to impeach the president, but as to what they're going to do, I showed Ted Cruz talking about putting a rider on the Homeland Security bill, and stopping all the nominations. I want to show from CBS's Face the Nation, there was this conservative Republican congressman from Idaho, who I think is also Latino. His name is Raul Labrador, and he also talked about censuring the president, as well as some of these budget riders, and I'll talk about that a little more after you see that clip here.
Well, there's several things that we need to do. Number one, it was illegal for the president to do this. He has been saying it for the last 3 years that he did not have the authority to do it, and now he changed his mind. I think it's also unfortunate because right after the election, he looked into the camera and he disagreed that his policies were rejected. He looked into the camera and he told the American people that this election was about working together with Congress, specifically working together with the Republican Party. And this is what he does right after the election. So instead of uniting us like he promised 7 years ago that he was going to do, he's dividing the nation in every single area. But what we should do is a lot of different things. Number one, I think we should censure the President of the United States. I think it's unfortunate that he did this. I think we need to lay out clearly why this is unlawful. I think we need to pass a funding bill and separate Homeland Security from that funding bill. And I think we also should require the President of the United States to go through a comment period, just like we have to do for regulations under the Administrative Procedures Act. And finally, and I think this is the most important part, we can't take the bait from the Democrats. We can't say we're not going to do immigration reform. We need to tell the American people what we're for, and we need to show them the step-by-step approach that we have been doing in the House. It's unfortunate to hear the President and other Democrats say that we haven't done anything. We have passed legislation out of the House, and the Democrats have refused to work with us on that legislation.
Well, and if you're wondering what it is that conservative Republicans think of as comprehensive immigration reform, I want to show the next answer from Raul Labrador to CBS's Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation this morning. And it's basically rejecting the comprehensive immigration reform from the Senate, what I think he calls it the Obama approach. And it's all about border security and not much else over in this clip.
You know, if it was my decision, I would start passing legislation. In fact, I asked our leadership to start passing legislation 2 weeks ago. I think we need to start with a border security bill. I think we need to show the American people that we're serious about border security. I think we can do something like we already passed out of the House of Representatives. We passed high-tech immigration.
What did your leaders say when you said we ought to do this? Did they give you any indication that they're going to?
I think we're going to start doing things. As you know, I serve on the House Judiciary Committee and the Immigration Subcommittee, and I think we're going to pass legislation. But it's not going to be the legislation that the President is asking for. We have rejected the legislation the President has been asking for. We as Republicans do not think you should give amnesty first and talk about security later, which is what the Senate bill did. We think security, border security, is foremost in our minds and in the minds of the American people. We need to do that first, and then we need to do a step-by-step approach where we reform the entire immigration system that is completely broken, and we can then do what the American people want us to do.
All right.
So yeah, that was Representative Raul Labrador, who's from the Judiciary Committee, the Immigration Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. But Bob Schieffer also had the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, so that would be the head of the committee who deals with immigration, you know, is part of Homeland Security now. And you can see Bob Schieffer gave him like this easy softball question at the beginning, you know, does what President Obama did help or hurt? And you'll see kind of a extended answer with, he uses that Republican talking point about President Obama himself said 22 times he didn't have the legal authority, and by the time he's done, I think he says that what President Obama has done is a threat to democracy of all things, over in this clip.
It seems to me that the president has drawn a line in the sand, or whatever you want to call it here. Is that going to help or hurt the situation?
I think it hurts the situation. It poisons the well. Going into a new Congress, the American people spoke in the elections, and one of the first things out of the box is he grants amnesty to 5 million people. And, you know, in your clip, he says that members of Congress question my legal authority to do this. So he himself said 22 times that he did not have the legal authority to do this. That's not how democracy works, he said. So I think this is a bit of a threat to our democracy. And Bob, regardless of where you stand on this issue, and I understand it's an emotional issue, but there's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do it. And I think the right way to do it is to work with Congress to get real results and solutions.
All right. Well,
I guess that wasn't that extended an answer, but I'm going to show a second answer from Chair of House Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCall, talking to Bob Schieffer on Face the Nation. This is where he talks more about what he thinks should be done. You know, Bob Schieffer asked him about what Ted Cruz had said on the nominees and, you know, stopping all of Obama's nominees and the possibility of impeachment. And Mike McCall just says we're not going to shut down the government, but we are going to shut down this executive action, basically, as you can see over in this clip.
Said what he has said. So what will Republicans do? Are you planning on getting some legislation together and sending it to the White House, or will you just try to block? Some people like Ted Cruz are saying, let's just hold up every nomination that he sends up to the Congress. Other people, I mean, there's even some talk, really not serious at this point, of maybe impeachment might be something to think about. What do you think Republicans ought to do next?
Well, I think the impeachment, and listen, the constitutionality issue will be determined by the courts. I know there are various lawsuits. My state, now governor, attorney general, now governor, is filing a lawsuit against us. The courts will decide that issue. But I want to make one thing very clear. We are not going to shut the government down. But we are going to shut down this president and his actions as it pertains to granting amnesty to 5 million people. And so we were looking at various options on the table right now, including the power of the purse, things that we can do to stop this in the short term. In the long term, to your question, Bob, I think it's incumbent upon Republicans to come up with our own agenda, a positive, constructive agenda, which will lead, I believe, with my committee's bill, and that would be the border security bill. We have to get that security piece done to have intelligent immigration reform, and that's not being done right now. And lastly, the biggest concern I have is because of this talk of amnesty and reform, we're really inviting a whole other wave of illegal immigrants that we saw in 1986 when amnesty was granted, and also when DACA was that executive action. There is cause and effect. It did result in 60,000 children crossing the Rio Grande Valley sector in my state. So I think we want to do this methodically, smart, starting with border security and then looking at immigration reform measures.
Do you?
Now, that part about how DACA caused this influx of children at the border, I dealt with that back in the summer in my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundups then, where it was actually this bill signed by George W. Bush that was supposed to stop, sex trade, and that said if you didn't come from Mexico or Canada and you were a minor, you couldn't be immediately sent back, and that had nothing to do with President Obama or DACA. That was one of the reasons that they got this longer period of time to stay in the United States before immediately being sent back, like those in Mexico. If it had been about DACA, then why wasn't there a big influx of Mexican kids at the border, right? Anyway, at least on CBS's Face the Nation, after having Raul Labrador give the Republican side and Michael McCall give the Republican side, they had a couple Democrats on, first Luis Gutierrez and then Senator Dick Durbin. Representative Luis Gutierrez spent an extended answer here refuting the previous Republican guests, and I thought he did a pretty good job of it, talking to Bob Schieffer over here.
So where do you think this
a couple of things.
Happen
surprise, surprise, surprise. The President of the United States, I mean, to listen to my friend from Idaho, anybody would think that the President of the United States, when he gave the State of the Union address last January, kind of took the gavel away from the Speaker of the House after he finished his State of the Union address. He said to the nation, if you do not act, I will use the powers that I have as President of the United States to begin to fix the broken immigration system. He repeated that. Speaker Boehner called him at the end of June and said, Mr. President, notwithstanding all your good efforts, notwithstanding all my good efforts, the House will not act on immigration reform. And what did he say? I've called my cabinet together and I will act on the immigration thing. So it seems to me that the argument is now we're going to start legislating. Well, it's 23 months into the legislative session. They control the House of Representatives. They don't need a single vote from the Democrats. We could have been in conference right now. I am not saying to my friend Raul Labrador that they need, and he knows that I never said this. I said, let's pass a House bill. I just want to make sure, Bob, when they said no gay families, we didn't walk away from it. When they said there was no path to citizenship, we didn't walk away. When they said we needed to do it in parts and pieces, we didn't walk away. When we gave them 30,000 more Border Patrol agents, we found a way to finance that. I think the problem here, if you listen to Mr. McCall and you listen to my friend Raul Labrador, they mix things up. They want border security, border security, border security. Comprehensive immigration reform secures the border. You cannot secure the border until, because they keep talking about a border, but you know which border they're talking about, the border between Mexico and the United States. Let me suggest to the American people that there are other borders. It's called LAX. It's called Kennedy. It's called right here, Washington Dulles. It is called airports all over this country. Millions of undocumented workers are in the United States that came through those borders. If you want a bill and you truly want to secure our community, the president, Bob, was forced to act. Last, think about it a moment. They want to censure the president. The president has said, I'm inviting millions of people to come forward, go through a background check, a criminal background check, at their own expense, pay the taxes that they owe, go back and work, and raise their American citizen children, Bob. I think children are special, and they're special no matter what the immigration condition of the parents that they have.
Well, let me just ask you this. Some people are already saying that the president taking this action is just going to cause a flood of immigrants to come in now because they want to come in and get in on this deal.
You want to know something? Great question. Number one, let me say the following. There's no path to citizenship for the 5 million that the president is offering. They can't get a single benefit, welfare benefit from the government. They can pay all the taxes that you and I'm sure you feel better and I feel better that they're paying taxes. I'm sure you and I feel better that they've gone through a background check. Now we can put the resources on criminals. So what the president says, look, I want to go after felons. I want to go after criminals. I don't want to break up families and go after children. But let's suggest this. We're going to put more Border Patrol agents on the border because now they don't have to do as much interior enforcement. Actually, here's a good thing. Do you know that under the president's program, the Border Patrol is going to be able to go and get an increase in their pay? Why? Because commensurate with their new responsibility, they should get paid.
So, yeah, that was kind of an extended clip, but I thought that was a really good defense of what President Obama's done and the executive order. And I want to show one more defense from a Democrat on CBS's Face the Nation. This is also a Democrat from Illinois, Senator Dick Durbin, defending the executive action and challenging the Republicans to actually govern over in this clip.
So that, and where do you think this
a couple of things
surprise take this tack?
He had no choice, Bob. I've listened to the Republican response to the president's executive action. It is clear that they can complain, they can threaten, they can talk about lawsuits, cutting off funding, shutting down the government, in the extreme, even impeachment. But the real question is, can they govern? Can they govern? It's been 513 days since we sent the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill from the Senate, which passed with 68 votes, to the House of Representatives. They've never called the bill. They've never had a hearing on the bill. They've never taken up any part of it. And now they complain because the president has stepped in and said we need accountability when it comes to immigration. They have to step up and govern. You asked the key question. Do you, among the Republicans, and Mr. McCall, do you among the Republicans have your act together? Do you know what you want? And at this point, it's not clear. Do they want to continue with the current broken down system, which is de facto amnesty? Do they want to sponsor some sort of massive deportation? I hope not. Or do they want to work with us?
Let me just ask you this.
So I thought, again, that was a good challenge to the Republicans for not having acted more like the SNL clip from last week than the one from this week of President Obama pushing the immigration bill down the steps of the Capitol. And I want to show a couple quick clips on immigration from NBC's Meet the Press before I finish up. Well, there'll be one more from Fox News after that. But this is actually one of the most reasonable Republicans I heard speak on the issue this morning. The senator from Arizona, Jeff Flake. I guess he was one of the bipartisan Senate Republicans who joined in the comprehensive immigration reform bill. And I think he's most reasonable, well, the main reason is because he wants to respond to what President Obama did by passing legislation, which is what Congress should do and what President Obama said they should do. And I'll talk about that a little more if you watch that here.
President, take this tack?
He had no choice, Bob. I've listened to the
Let me start with you. Very quickly, Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, his lawsuit. There's possibly a couple others that states may file. Do you support Arpaio's lawsuit against the president?
Well, what I think we ought to do is put legislation on the president's desk. You know, the president has only addressed one small portion of what needs to be done with immigration reform. We've got to do border security, interior enforcement, guest worker plan, and have a mechanism to deal with those who are here illegally. He's done one portion of the latter, so I'd rather move legislation on the other three items and put it on his desk. That would be my approach.
I understand that, but are you for or against the lawsuit?
I haven't even seen the lawsuit, so I don't know what it contains. I do think the president. Do you think it's
appropriate to sue the president on his action?
I do think that the president moved beyond his authority, and no less than the Washington Post editorial board has opined about that. Having said that, from my role in the Senate, I think we ought to put legislation on the president's desk. That ought to be the response.
So, yeah, responding with legislation, that's the reasonable part. I haven't seen what the Washington Post editorial board said, so I don't know why they supposedly said that President Obama exceeded his authority. My legal opinion, and I'm going to show you a possible source to understand it a little more yourself in a minute, but my legal opinion is that he's totally within his authority, and I want to show a clip also from NBC's Meet the Press. And I like the way that Senator Jeff Flake there totally dodged the question of whether he would join the Sheriff Joe Arpaio lawsuit. I haven't even seen that lawsuit, which seems like that's something he should be better briefed on by his staff, I guess. But I want to show a clip of a different senator, Robert Menendez from New Jersey, who I think makes a really good argument about why what President Obama did on immigration is legal. And that'll be like the second to last clip on immigration I show. I'm going to show a still photo I showed last week, but this is the penultimate immigration clip. This is the last one from Meet the Press. Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey here.
Senator Menendez, let me pick up on the legal case here. The question is whether the president can be impacting millions of people with prosecutorial discretion and things like that. Are you comfortable that this meets a constitutional test?
Oh, absolutely. Look, 11 presidents going back to President Eisenhower on 39 separate occasions issued executive actions on immigration over the last 60 years. And the most recent significant one was President Reagan and the first President Bush, who issued executive actions that protected 1.5 million undocumented people in the country, which is about 40% of all the undocumented in the country at the time. And over 100 constitutional law professors in the country have issued statements to the president before he acted that this was well within his authority. So, look, as a result of the president's actions, more felons will be deported. More Border Patrol will be at the southern border, more people will pay taxes, and more families will be able to stay together. I think those are goals that are worthy of being achieved.
Senator.
So like Senator Menendez said there, it's legal and it's good, basically. First he explained why it's legal, and then also why it's actually good for the undocumented immigrants and good for the United States economy, and it's win-win-win-win, or I don't know how many wins, but I don't know why there's so many Republicans who oppose it. But the last clip I want to show is Governor-elect of Texas, Greg Abbott. I started showing with that Fox News intro about how they were going to have this one-sided argument about whether it's legal or not. And you can see this was the most softball interview from Fox News Sunday this morning. Chris Wallace basically letting Greg Abbott state the grounds of why he thinks this is all illegal, and he talks about, the Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution and how the president has to faithfully execute the laws. But like I said, in the immigration laws passed by Congress, the president is given huge discretion on how to enforce the laws, even beyond, his prosecutorial discretion and the more general cases. But anyway, here's that clip of the newly elected governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, explaining why he thinks he should be able to sue the president over here.
Several grounds. One is what the president has done violates the Take Care Clause that under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, requiring that the president take care to faithfully execute the laws. Now understand, this is no little trinket in the Constitution. At the Constitutional Convention itself, they considered whether or not the president should have the authority to dispense with enforcing certain laws, and they decided no, they didn't want to give the president that authority. They wanted to ensure the president would be limited in his authority and ensure that the president would take care to execute the laws passed by Congress. In this case, the president is violating that Take Care Clause.
Let me pick up on that, and you can give other reasons in a moment, because a number of legal scholars say that the president can make the argument that he's faithfully executing the law. They point out that in the last fiscal year, the Border Patrol arrested 500,000 people for crossing the border, and so therefore he's faithfully executing the law, they would argue, and that this is simply a matter of prosecutorial discretion.
2 points about that. One is what the president is doing by this doesn't have anything to do with the arrests he's making on the border. It has to do with the fact that he is dispensing with the immigration law as it currently exists and is rewriting that law. That was the purpose behind the take care to faithfully execute the law that's in the Constitution. Second, this is not prosecutorial discretion. Prosecutorial discretion is when a president or the attorney general or whoever decides they are not going to prosecute someone because of lack of resources or something like that. What the president is doing here is giving affirmative benefits to people who are here illegally. That is not prosecutorial discretion. That is rewriting the immigration laws to help those the president wants to help.
Of course, you don't have to rewrite the immigration laws. It's already in there. You know, I showed a link to this. I put a link down in the video description to this National Immigration Law Center page that talks about the president's broad authority in the immigration area. And I don't know. I think it's pretty clear that what the president did, I don't think it goes far enough, but I think it's definitely legal. I don't know. And I don't think these presidential lawsuits are going to go anywhere. And it is kind of this weird trap he set for the Republicans where they may overreact, and it's putting possible 2016 Republican presidential candidates in the primaries. They're going to have to say whether they're going to undo what President Obama did, which is basically saying, I'm going to start searching out and deporting the parents of all these U.S. citizens and legal residents, if that's what they need to do to make the Republican base happy. And that is not a good position for Republicans to be in, to be pro the destruction of families of U.S. citizens. And what's the good that even comes of that? I don't know. Anyway, those are all the clips I want to show on immigration. I've been checking out the comments along the way. I appreciate I've got over 100 viewers watching. And by the way, if you want to, if you're watching this as a recorded show and you want to help defray the cost of the show so I don't have to put in so many commercials, there should, if you put your mouse pointer right up there in the left-hand corner, there should be a little eye that you can click on and donate to the channel. And also on my channel page you should be able to find a link to support LiberalViewer. That's only if you're in the United States, Japan, Australia, and Canada, I think. So if you're in any other country, I don't think you can donate to the channel, so sorry about that if you wanted to. But I want to get to the next topic of the show here is Ferguson, Missouri. That looks like the grand jury is about to come to a decision, maybe as early as tomorrow, as to whether this Officer Darren Wilson should be charged with a crime for killing this unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown. And one of the things that happened this week is that the governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, declared a state of emergency and activated the National Guard, which seems kind of premature, or I don't know. Well, I want to show Michael Che on Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update kind of made a joke about that, which I'll discuss a little more after you watch that here.
In anticipation of the grand jury decision in Ferguson, Governor Jay Nixon has declared a state of emergency and deployed the National Guard. So, spoiler alert, I guess we know what the verdict is. Deploying the National Guard before the verdict is like your lawyer telling you to show up to court in something orange.
So I thought that was kind of funny. And then about the state of emergency that Jay Nixon declared and the governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, declared, I thought there was a good comment from the head of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks, interviewed by Bob Schieffer this morning. Here he is talking about how what Jay Nixon did is kind of provocative over in this clip.
I'm very concerned. The governor's responded to this as though it were a security crisis as opposed to a social justice crisis. And so I believe that his actions with respect to the Guard in the state of emergency are presumptuous as to the intent of the demonstrators, who are really young practitioners of democracy, and presumptuous with respect to what may happen. We can go into this expecting nonviolent civil disobedience. I believe that the governor should respond systemically in terms of what he's going to do, what he's going to call upon his state to do. The task force is a great start, but much more needs to be done.
I really like that phrasing about it being how Jay Nixon has responded as if it were a security problem instead of a social justice problem. And I think that's kind of echoed in an answer that I'm going to show from President Obama in a little bit. But first I want to show the answer from the head of the NAACP, Cornell Brooks, there, that I really liked, where Bob Schieffer asked him what's going to happen if the grand jury doesn't come up with any charges against this police officer. And his response is basically a huge criticism of the St. Louis County prosecutor, Bob McCullough, who, when I was a public defender in St. Louis County, he was the prosecutor then, and I had a lot of problems with some of the way he treated police cases. He has a long history of being very pro-police, which I'll talk about that a little more after I show here's the next clip from Cornell Brooks talking to Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
I'm very concerned. The governor's responded to this as though it were a security crisis.
As you well know, I mean, this grand jury may well not return an indictment here. They may take no action. And what I'm hearing, it's going to be a very hard case for the prosecutors probably to prove. Are you concerned about, if that happens, what the reaction of the community will be? Do you think it will be violent?
I am concerned. I am concerned because we have a prosecutor who had 5 complaints filed with the Justice Department concerning his police departments by the NAACP. He failed to take action. This was before Mike Brown. He then conducts a grand jury process where he essentially dumps evidence into the laps of the grand jury with little direction. So are we concerned? Yes. But we're more concerned about the failure of the grand jury to be given the kind of direction as is typically the case. And we're concerned about a grieving family and an outraged community. We want justice for them first and foremost, but we want to prevent more Mike Browns. That's the issue here.
Well,
I'll talk a little more about the grand jury process in a minute, but those criticisms of the St. Louis County prosecutor, Bob McCullough, and all the complaints against him, that really rings true with me based on about 2.5 years I spent working as a public defender in St. Louis County, and it kind of brought back memories to me when I saw the news report on CBS's Face the Nation from their reporter, Mark Strassman. He was standing right in front of the building I used to work at in Clayton, Missouri, which is where the St. Louis County Court Center is. Not the whole time. They actually built this building while I was working there, and I moved into it in like the latter half of the time I worked as a public defender. And you can see that building in this news report about how the community is on edge over here.
Strassman is outside the courthouse in Clayton, Missouri. Mark?
Well, Bob, for the last 3 months, this grand jury has been looking at police officer Darren Wilson and trying to decide whether he should be criminally charged for shooting Michael Brown on August 9th. The grand jury has been given a voluminous case. Essentially, it's as though a criminal case has been presented to them. They have to decide, should he be charged with murder, should he be charged with voluntary or involuntary manslaughter, or should he not be charged at all? The stakes, of course, are enormous here. There's a great deal of apprehension throughout this community. Security has been ramped up over the last couple of days. The governor has declared a state of emergency. You have security barriers in all the potential hotspots where protesters might gather. And you also have an increased police presence as a look around. You see police officers guarding parking lots, guarding buildings, guarding this community, trying to give a sense of calm here. Everybody has pleaded for peace, from Attorney General Eric Holder to Michael Brown's parents. But depending what the grand jury decides, of course, anything could happen here, and that is what has put this community on edge.
Mark Strauss.
So yeah, they're community on edge, and like I said, kind of weird for me to see the guy standing outside the building I used to work in. And I said I'd talk a little more about how weird the grand jury process is, but I can actually show one of the attorneys for the family of Michael Brown, Benjamin Crump, who I remember he also was attorney, I think, for the family of Trayvon Martin. Here he is on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking about how strange this grand jury process is here.
Well, I just think this process is unlike anything I've ever seen in my 20 years of practice. We don't think it's fair because when you think about it, if this prosecutor is saying we're just going to be fair, we're not going to recommend any charges, that's different from anything he's done in his past 28 years with grand juries. So now are we going to say he was unfair to all those people and he's going to be extra fair, get a police extra rights? Why can't it be equal justice? When our children dead on the ground, why can't we have the same process? Why you change the rules? Why you can't come and recommend charges right now based on the probable cause? You said it yourself a minute ago. It's just probable cause. 7 people said his hands was up.
Let me ask you a question.
And that's true. This grand jury process is very different. And one thing you need to understand also is in Missouri, there is no requirement for a grand jury. The prosecutor could have decided to charge this by information instead of a grand jury indictment, and then all of this could have been public. All the witnesses could have come to a preliminary hearing. I think that would have been a lot better. And I also want to show one more clip from Benjamin Crump on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where he's talking about how he's not worried about, the due process rights of the police officer in the grand jury, because George Stephanopoulos asked him, well, what if there was a struggle for the gun and all they need is probable cause to arrest, and the due process rights would come in the trial? And as Benjamin Crump points out, it's really the dead kid who he's more worried about getting due process, and you can see that over in this clip.
The process is unfair?
Oh, the process is completely unfair. 99% of the time, police officers aren't charged when they kill young people of color. So when you look at the face of those overwhelming statistics and you think that we're upset because...
But let me ask the question, what if there was a struggle? What if there was a struggle for the gun and the evidence shows that?
You know what? In America, we have a constitution. You have a right to trial by jury. And I have no doubt if they were to indict the police officer, he would be guaranteed his full constitutional rights of innocent to proven guilty. He would get every benefit of the doubt. I don't worry about the due process for Officer Wilson. I worry about the due process for the little black boy dead on the ground.
We're going to have to leave him.
That's a pretty powerful statement, I think, from Benjamin Crump about, the due process of a police officer versus the dead kid on the ground. And I want to show a couple more clips from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is back from the interview with President Obama. George Stephanopoulos asked President Obama if he has any message for the people of Ferguson and otherwise to, what to do in case of this Ferguson verdict. And this is the clip I was talking about where you can see how President Obama does have more of a social justice response than a security response, compared to the supposedly Democratic governor of Missouri, Jay Nixon, who I was never quite a fan of. He was Attorney General back when I lived in Missouri and very pro-death penalty, so sometimes hard to remember he's a Democrat. And here's a much more Democratic response from President Obama talking to George Stephanopoulos this morning. And let me make sure I click on the right number clip, number 35 here.
Yeah. Your FBI has warned about possible violence in the wake of that decision. What is your message to the people of Ferguson and others who are looking to protest?
Well, I think first and foremost, keep protests peaceful.
this is a country that allows everybody to express their views, but using any event as an excuse for violence is contrary to rule of law and contrary to who we are.
In Ferguson,
part of what I've asked Eric Holder to do is to not just engage with the folks in Ferguson, but to engage nationally in a conversation between law enforcement and communities of color that oftentimes feel as if they are not being treated fairly by law enforcement officials. Sometimes their concerns are justified. Sometimes they're not justified. Law enforcement has a very tough job.
Are you worried here?
We saw during the summer the possibility of even overwhelmingly peaceful crowds being overrun by a few thugs. What I've done is called Jay Nixon, the governor of Missouri, to make sure that he has a plan to respond in a careful and appropriate way to any potential violence, to be able to sort out the vast majority of peaceful protesters from the handful who are not. In the end, what I have confidence in is that if we do a better job of training our law enforcement to be sensitive to the concerns of minority communities, then over time, trust can be built, in part because minority communities typically are subject to more crime. They need law enforcement more than anybody. And there are a lot of communities in my hometown of Chicago, for example, who actually want to see more police in, but they want to make sure that the police are trained so they can distinguish between a gangbanger and a kid who just happens to be wearing a hoodie, but otherwise is a good kid and not doing anything wrong.
One of your
Now, I mean, police training, that's one thing. I mean, that certainly would be helpful in having police forces more diverse. I saw that talked about. But it doesn't really address the racism inherent in the system, and especially the drug war part and the way that targets people in a racist way. And I was really disappointed, especially when President Obama was asked by George Stephanopoulos about something Representative John Lewis said about Ferguson being like Selma, and President Obama specifically said that it's not about systemic racism this time, and I'll explain why I think that is a problem after I show you that clip here.
John Lewis has suggested that if there's no indictment in this case, it would be a miscarriage of justice and another turning point like Selma. Do you agree with that?
I love John. I didn't see the quote, so I don't want to comment on what John specifically said, but I will say this, that the kinds of ongoing problems we have with police and communities of color around the country are not of the sort that we saw in Selma. We're not talking about systematic segregation or discrimination. They are solvable problems if, in fact, law enforcement officials are open to the kind of training and best practices that we've seen instituted in a lot of parts of the country.
Do you think it would make sense for you to go to Ferguson?
Now, like I said before, I think that gets partway to solving the problem. But if you, like I've talked about this book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander's book, talking about how the mass incarceration is sort of a continuation of segregation, even though it's not explicitly racist, it really has a racist impact and it's discriminatory, and I think that's a lot more true than what President Obama said there. And then I want to show one more clip on sort of the passion of the whole issue of Ferguson and race, and it's when over on NBC's Meet the Press there was this argument between former New York Governor Mayor Giuliani and Professor Michael Eric Dyson. I'm not really a fan of either of these guys, but you can see them like argue back and forth kind of passionately. I'm not going to show the entire argument, but almost all of it. And it started when Rudy Giuliani tried to change the subject to the problem of black-on-black crime instead of racist police officers or police officers continually shooting young black men. And that's the final Ferguson clip for tonight here.
By the way, but the fact is, I find it very disappointing that you're not discussing the fact that 93% of blacks in America are killed by other blacks. We're talking about the exception here.
Well, look, first of all,
go ahead, Michael. No, but this is about a trust issue.
We are talking about the significant exception. 93% of blacks are killed by other blacks.
Let me respond to that.
I would like to see the attention. I'd like to see the attention paid to that you are paying to this, and the solutions to that.
He's taking up time. Can I say this? First of all, most black people who commit crimes against other black people go to jail. Number two, they are not sworn by the police department as a agent of the state to uphold the law. So in both cases, that's a false equivalency that the mayor has drawn, which has exacerbated tensions that are deeply embedded in American culture. Black people who kill black people go to jail. Black people who kill black people go to jail. White people who are policemen who kill black people do not go to jail. If a jury can indict a ham sandwich, why is it taking so long?
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you, it's the trust issue, though. This is a trust issue.
It's hardly insignificant.
I didn't say it was insignificant. I said it was out of proportion in your false equivalency, sir.
It is the reason for the heavy police presence in the black community.
Not at all. Not at all.
93%.
The police presence cannot make a distinction between those who are criminals and those who call the police to stop the criminals.
So it kind of went on like that for another minute. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but I thought I'm more on the side of Michael Eric Dyson, although he's certainly not my favorite pundit. But those are all the clips I want to show on Ferguson, Missouri. I think that story is probably going to break tomorrow, from what I've heard, or at least the grand jury's meeting again tomorrow. So that could be the time when they'll vote, and then it could take time for them to release it. And but it sounds very much like that's going to happen this week because it was promised like mid-late November, and you can't get much later in November than a week from today, right? So that should be happening this week, and I want to show a few clips on something that's supposed to happen tomorrow. It's the culmination of the U.S.-Iran nuclear talks, although it looked kind of like they're going to be extended. And here's a news report on that from Margaret Brennan on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
Deadline for a new deal is Monday. So far, little progress has been reported. Now both sides are expecting there to be no deal. Margaret Brennan joins us now from Vienna. Margaret?
Well, Bob, the U.S. and other world powers are making what they think is a generous offer to Iran, which is they'll gradually lift sanctions if that country agrees to further slow its nuclear program. But Iran is rejecting that, at least so far. They want an immediate suspension of all sanctions, which badly damage their economy, and they haven't agreed to completely give up all of the components that could be used to build a weapon. Secretary Kerry and Iran's top negotiator met again today, and they have until midnight tomorrow to find some common ground.
So what happens if there's no deal by tomorrow, Margaret?
Well, the most likely outcome is an extension of the current agreement, which was reached last November and temporarily freezes Iran's nuclear program in exchange for some sanctions relief. That would at least let the negotiators keep on talking, but it's hardly a victory. Iranian hardliners are likely to say that talking is a waste of time, and President Obama, who really wanted this as a major foreign policy win, is going to face increased pressure from the newly Republican-led Congress and skeptical Mideast allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia.
And I'm going to show a clip from one of those skeptical Mideast allies, Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, right after I showed this clip from President Obama, specifically answering a question from George Stephanopoulos in the interview that they showed this morning on ABC about what's going on in the Iran negotiations over in this clip.
And President Obama has not been optimistic.
It's too early to tell. The good news is that the interim deal that we entered into has definitely stopped Iran's nuclear program from advancing. So it's been successful.
But a deal would require a rollback, wouldn't it?
Well, so now the question is, can we get to a more permanent deal? And the gaps are still significant.
Are you willing to extend if there's no deal by Monday?
You know, I think what we're going to do is take a look at what emerges over the course of the weekend.
Both you and President Rouhani have some constraints. He's got the Ayatollah. You have Congress. Are you confident that if you reach a deal, Congress will back it?
I'm confident that if we reach a deal that is verifiable and assures that Iran does not have breakout capacity, that not only can I persuade Congress, but I can persuade the American people that it's the right thing to do.
And then Iran joins the fight against ISIS?
Well, you know,
I'm not going to show how it goes into the whole fight against ISIS, but I did think it was interesting what President Obama said there about the Iran negotiations, and it sounds like there's going to be some kind of extension, but I want to show that skeptical Mideast ally, Benjamin Netanyahu, always willing to be pessimistic about any kind of deal with Iran. Here he is also on This Week with George Stephanopoulos in the final Iran clip of the night here.
But I think it's important that there won't be a bad deal. A bad deal would enable Iran to remain with thousands of centrifuges, which it could use to enrich uranium, which is what you need for a nuclear bomb. It could do so in a very short time. I think the key principle is this: don't dismantle sanctions before you dismantle Iran's capacity to make a nuclear bomb. And as I understand it, the Iranians are nowhere near to accepting that. And if, for any reason, the United States and the other powers agree to leave Iran with that capacity to break out, I think that would be a historic mistake. Not only because it endangers my country, Israel, that Iran's ruler, the Ayatollah Khamenei, vows to annihilate, but also because I think it would endanger the entire Middle East and the world.
So what options is Israel?
So that seems pretty pessimistic, and I don't know, you can let me know what you think down in the comments section about this coming U.S.-Iran nuclear deal. One thing I didn't show was this focus on oil on NBC, that one of the points they made was the lessening of the price of oil has really made things more difficult for Iran and for Russia, which I'm not even going to cover in the show. But I did want to show a few quick clips on the Bill Cosby controversy, which I had heard about vaguely over the years. But I want to show first, Bill Maher talked about how kind of the evidence has been building up recently since the whole viral Hannibal Buress comedy routine. But I'll talk about the timeline of facts a little more after I show this Bill Maher monologue joke about the building evidence here.
And I'm always on the side of innocent until proven guilty. I get it. Celebrities are targets, but 16 women? All with the same story? Even for a guy who did a sitcom in the 80s, that's a lot of wacky misunderstandings.
So, of course, it's not really that funny, but I guess that's kind of as funny as you can get it. Or I'm going to show a Saturday Night Live joke in a minute, too. But first, I want to show the timeline of the Cosby controversy as described by Chuck Todd, and then he puts it into a question to Michael Eric Dyson, who has already written a critical book about Bill Cosby before all this broke, and you can see that clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning here.
Quick timeline of events here and how this all came up. This rumors of him sexually assaulting women have been around Hollywood for years. Right. But it came back in October. A comedian, Hannibal Buress, basically called Cosby a rapist during a stand-up routine, and that routine went viral. Then, November 13th, Barbara Bowman wrote an essay, Bill Cosby Raped Me, put that in the Washington Post. November 16th, a publicist, Joan Tarshish, writes an essay for Hollywood Elsewhere recounting 2 times where she alleges that she was raped by Cosby. November 18th, an interview with Entertainment Tonight model Janice Dickinson alleges being assaulted by Cosby. And then, of course, the fallout. NBC, Netflix pull projects with Cosby. On November 19th, 3 more women come forward on November 20th. Michael, you wrote this book on Cosby. Is this something that that a whole bunch of people knew about, but a lot of us didn't?
I think so. It was an open secret to many people, at least the allegations. But as Dr. King was fond of quoting, truth crushed the earth will rise again. And you can't anticipate what will happen. The internet 10 years later. I wrote a book 10 years ago. Mr. Cosby was highly irate. A new biography that's come out talked about his hatred of me, and I understand that because I challenged him. And I challenged him on the fact that he was going around the country giving moral lessons of condescending elements to young African-American people, and they were nasty and vicious.
And this is where the retaliation is coming from a little bit, right? It's sort of it's more because he was basically preaching.
Well, he's throwing rocks and he's living in a glass house. And so people, that contradiction will always get you sunk.
You know, Amy, it's interesting.
Yeah, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, I guess. And the allegations definitely have been building. I want to show the last clip. This is how it was dealt with on Saturday Night Live. Michael Che on Weekend Update, and something he said about it kind of brought back a memory for me that I'll talk about a little more after I show you that clip here.
Hey, Bill Cosby, pull your damn pants up. I've always wanted to say that. In the wake of allegations against Bill Cosby, TV Land pulled all reruns of The Cosby Show. And I don't know how to feel about that because I don't know Bill Cosby, but Cliff Huxtable practically raised me. I love that dude. And the only thing he ever tried to sneak when people were asleep was a hoagie. So while I may never forgive Bill Cosby, hopefully someday I can forgive Dr. Huxtable. I mean, I know it's not the same thing, but I forgave Kramer.
I don't know. I mean, actually, I really liked Bill Cosby before The Cosby Show. I remember in the 70s, I used to go to my public library and listen to all these comedy records. You know, I've talked on the show about my love of stand-up comedy and, you know, Bill Cosby records and Bob Newhart and George Carlin and Cheech and Chong and Stan Freberg. And, I mean, I listened to a lot of those records over and over again, and they were really, really funny. And it's kind of difficult to accept, but like I said, the evidence is building, you know, multiple accusations, even though it's not a criminal conviction, that really puts, you know, all those allegations really puts, I think, some, it puts the onus on Bill Cosby to prove his innocence in the court of public opinion a little bit, I think. And I really contrast it to a video I made a while back about Woody Allen, that one of the reasons I find that a little more difficult to believe is there's only the one allegation, which, I don't know, it's a problem. And I'm really over time. Before I finish the show, though, I promised this clip of John Cleese talking about religion. You know, all that controversy I had about religion on my channel from Bill Maher clips about Islam. I wanted to show something talking about religion with from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher that I could actually agree with. And it's what I think is the problem with religion isn't Islam or Christianity or Judaism or any of those other religions. The real problem is fundamentalism. And I thought John Cleese put it really well on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday in an interview he had with Bill Maher here.
But I mean, I think any kind of fundamentalism is terribly funny because all, you know, the thing about fundamentalism is it's taking whatever the book is, the Quran or the Bible, absolutely literally.
Right.
Now, I've met some pretty smart people in my life. You know, not a single one of them was literal minded.
Right.
Right?
That's absolutely true.
So do we, So do we say, well, Jesus said these things, but of course Jesus was very, very literal minded, so he would want these things to be interpreted absolutely literally. No, he was smarter than that. And this is a basic misunderstanding.
Well, if you're going to take anybody literally, I would take him literally, because he was a promoter of peace.
Yes.
Although he could be cranky too.
Well, he threw the moneylenders out of the temple, didn't he?
Right, and he said things like, if you don't come to God through me, you will burn, which is cranky.
Yeah,
But in general, he's nicer.
On the whole, he's nice.
But, all right, so you're out doing...
Blessed are the nice.
Yeah,
That's what he said on the Sermon on the Mount.
Sermon of the Night, yeah.
So that was kind of amusing, and I thought that was insightful that people who are literal-minded usually aren't very bright, and that's where fundamentalists come from. So I wanted to show something critical of religion that was on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher that I can agree with. You can let me know if you agree with it down in the comment section. I'm way over time. I'm really sorry. I started an hour later than usual, and the show was almost to an hour and 45 minutes. I appreciate. I think I got about 2, medium-sized donations this last week that mean I'm only going to put ads in every half hour. Like I said, wrong side. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you can click right there if you're in those 4 countries and donate to help me keep the commercials out of the show. And I appreciate. I had almost 130 viewers here. I've been reading your comments along the way, but don't have time to get into them, unfortunately. Thanks for joining me, though, and I'll be doing the show again, picking out the best clips I can find from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. No more Bill Maher for several weeks now. Maybe, I think there is another Saturday Night Live, maybe something from that next week, and I'm sure more going on with all these other topics, and who knows what will be the breaking news, probably the grand jury and Ferguson. So hope to see you next week, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, hopefully more on time. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.